Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 326 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's show is sponsored by the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump and the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. You can check out Dexcom at dexcom.com/juicebox and find out everything you want to know about the Omnipod, including how to get a free no-obligation demo of the pump sent directly to your home at myomnipod.com/juicebox. You know, the podcast is about a lot of different things surrounding type 1 diabetes, and very often we talk about management. When we do, we kind of speak about it on a macro and a micro level, right? You know, the idea of using a temp basal increase or decrease, for instance, that works with every insulin pump. But when you hear me speak specifically about a pump, most of the time you'll hear me talk about Omnipod because that's what my daughter's been using for 14 years. Same with CGM. My daughter's had a Dexcom since, I don't even remember what the first one was called, but a really long time. So when I talk about CGM, you might hear me talk about it macro, how to use the data to make good decisions, or micro, how a Dexcom works. But we've never been able to talk about the Medtronic 670G in a micro way because I've never used it. So what I did was I brought Jenny Smith on because Jenny's worn the 670G and she trains people on how to use it. So this is Jenny's experience. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Of course, you know Jenny Smith from the Diabetes Pro Tip episodes here on the Juicebox Podcast or Defining Diabetes episodes. We do Ask Scott and Jenny together. As a matter of fact, this Thursday, there'll be a live Ask Scott and Jenny on my Facebook page. That's going to be Thursday the 23rd, he says, because he's not 100% sure what today's date is. I'll look for you. Hold on. Thursday the 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Bold with Insulin Facebook page. Jenny and I will be doing a live hour of Ask Scott and Jenny. Jenny is a certified diabetes educator. She's had type 1 diabetes for well over 30 years. She works at Integrated Diabetes. And Jenny is adept at walking people through using different pumps and CGMs. And enough of you have asked about 670G that I thought, well, let me get Jenny on and we'll find out what her experience was while she was wearing it. I would like to talk about and do an overview of how it works and how to use it and what's good about it and what's bad about it, about the Medtronic 670G. So this is not meant to, let's start off like this. I think we all know that Jenny doesn't love the 670G. Like, she doesn't hate it. But when you talk about it, there's not love in your voice, is what I'm saying. But there are plenty of people using it, and they should know how to use it as best as possible.
Correct.
And that's sort of what my goal is for this. I started off by familiarizing myself with the system a little bit online. And I was surprised. See, immediately it's going to sound like I'm not a fan, but I don't mean this in any judgmental way other than, Arden uses an Omnipod. I open up a little plastic thing. There's a pod inside of it, and that's the entirety of what we use, right? So I'm looking at this, and there's a pump itself. There's a reservoir, a glucose monitor, an infusion set, inserting device. There's an infusion set, and I was like, wow, that seems like a lot of stuff. But I get it. Like, it's a different situation, a different setup and everything. So anyway, so those are the pieces. There's the pump, the reservoir, the CGM, which is a proprietary Medtronic CGM.
Correct.
And
now it's called the Guardian.
The Guardian.
It used to be, if you're still using it, you could potentially maybe still have the N-Light, and the old one, I think it was called the Soft Sensor.
Okay. All right.
So they've had quite a number of updates. Yes. So current is Guardian.
That is the exact lack of love I was talking about right there. So then there's the infusion set for people who aren't pumping or using an Omnipod. It's an adhesive thing with a plastic thing on top that, it's like a port, I guess, that goes to a piece of tubing. That tubing goes to the insulin pump, and you can disconnect that set, right? Like to take it, you have
correct.
To, right,
To take a shower, to get in the pool, to do all of those things. There's also a little piece that, whether most people use it or not, there is a little extra piece that you pop into the infusion site once you disconnect from the tubing.
To cap it.
That's supposed to, and you pop it. It's almost like a cap. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're supposed to technically put it in order to prevent extra things from, getting in there.
So when I disconnect, I'm supposed to cap this site. Okay.
Yes, you're supposed to cap it. Yes.
Okay. So those are the pieces. And then there's the insertion. So it's sort of, to me, it looks like it's maybe palm size, sort of like a cup. I guess you set it on your skin and press on it or squeeze a button or something like that. And
that would be for one of their infusion sets. And all the pump companies that have tubed pumps have different types of sets, dependent on, your body type and what works well for you. The one that you're talking about, it usually works with their, it's called the quick set.
Okay.
You kind of, it comes with this little, almost looks like a little pod, sort of, like an alien UFO almost is what I call it.
Okay.
And you open it up and you pull, there's like a little, like a lever inside that you sort of pull back and you cock it essentially. Okay. And then when you squeeze the buttons on the side, it pops the infusion set or the infusion set underneath your skin. Okay. There are other ones like the Silhouette, which is more, it's an angled, it's not 90 degrees like the quick set. Mm-hmm. The Mio is another one that's a 90 degree that they have, and the Silhouette is an angled one. That does come with an inserter. I would say a good 75% of people, though, who are using the Silhouette are self-inserting. They're just pushing that infusion set underneath their skin. They're not actually using the insertion device. I myself, when I was using Medtronic, I had tried using the Silhouette and I wasn't using the inserter. Okay. I was just doing it myself.
So you just fried my brain a little bit as a person who's never used a tube pump. So you're telling me at some point there was an infusion set, and it still exists now, that I press into my body like
the needle with the covering cannula on it. Yeah.
Gotcha. And that's how it's meant to be used.
It is. So in two ways, that set in and of itself is, it comes with an inserter. The inserter, in fact, I think it, as a visual for people who can't see us talking, mm-hmm. The insertion device looks much like the old G5 inserter for the sensor. Okay. That's what it looks like. It's it's almost like a thick pen. Mm-hmm. The infusion set goes into the end of it.
Right.
And then the button on the end you press and it pushes the infusion set under your skin. The big thing with it is that it's meant to go in at a certain angle under the skin. Mm-hmm. And with that device, it's like a very fine rocking of your own hand to keep it at a 45-degree angle.
Okay.
So you could technically insert it too shallow, or you could insert it too deep, not the way that the infusion set is technically supposed to be inserted. I myself found that the inserter did not work well for me.
Okay.
So even my husband, he was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm putting my infusion set in." He's like, "That's a really big needle." And I'm like, "Thank you very much. I'm quite aware of that."
Yeah.
So yes, it's a and it does. I mean, for people who are using it, they get used to it. I can say it's not my favorite thing to do. And of all the sets, my favorite set of all, even compared to Omnipod, which you don't get a choice in a set.
Right.
It is just what it is. It's built in. I've never had any problems with Omnipod set, thankfully. But my favorite for any tubed pump is the one that's called, it's a steel cannula. So it's almost like a thumbtack that sits under the skin.
Okay. And why do you like it?
I like it because it goes in at a 90-degree angle. I had so many problems with kinked, bent, problematic tubes that were the typical like Teflon type of cannula under the skin.
Yeah.
I've never in my almost 15 years of using Omnipod now, I have had maybe two kinked sites, maybe two. With the tube pumps, however, I have had my supply of way more than I've ever wanted. So the nice thing about the steel cannula, for Medtronic, it's called the Sure T. For if you're a Tandem user, it would be called the True Steel.
Okay.
So they both make a completely steel cannula, pops under the skin like a thumbtack popping into a cork board. There is no hassle to using it. It stays in place. No kinking at all. There's a lot less site irritation for many people with it. There are a lot less site infections with using it. So, yeah.
Gotcha. I can say that I know Arden has had one cannula problem in the entire time she's used Omnipod. And I was doing the math on it the other day. She started when she was 4. She's going to be 16. So Arden's been wearing...
almost as long as me.
Yeah. Arden's been wearing an Omnipod for 12 years every day, and so we've had one. And when I look back on it, it happened like it was a pump we put on like at a poolside. And I remember it all being a little like I want to get back in the pool. Like it wasn't,
it was like quick.
It wasn't being done maybe exactly right. But, it was obvious. The CGM made it obvious that it wasn't working. So
right.
Actually, it was funny. The CGM made it obvious it wasn't working after we got her away from the pool. It actually turned out that, I think her exercise had kept her blood sugar down for the couple of hours. And then when we got away from the pool, then all of a sudden you could tell, hey, this thing's not working right. So anyway, okay. Now, that seems like a lot to me, but I'm not here to critique the I really want everyone to understand it. It's tough because there's the side of me that feels like I don't know. I a lot of what you just said, I think, wow, a lot of that doesn't seem necessary, but okay.
Right. Well, and I can say too, from just giving credit as well, of all the pumps on the market today, of which there are only 3 brands that are out there right now, FDA approved. Omnipod is the easiest by far. So if you were going to rate them in ease of like filling using even a cannula and a reservoir, Omnipod is the easiest. Yeah. Medtronic, honestly, is the second easiest.
Okay.
As cumbersome as it looked to you, having never really done it yourself or needing to, it's actually the second easiest. Tandems it's a weird system. I mean, and I say that from the standpoint, it just has a lot more steps in the filling of the reservoir, the filling of the tubing, and it just takes longer. Yeah. So,
I don't know.
There's some credit to Medtronic there, I guess.
Hey, Medtronic, you're not as bad as the Tandem when it comes to use. Congratulations. Put that on a box.
As it comes to reservoir and filling tubing use. Yes.
Excuse me. Specifically reservoir and filling use. Wouldn't that be a tagline? Medtronic, we're not as bad as Control IQ for filling the reservoir. Okay, this is getting out of hand already. Yes. I'm sorry, Medtronic users, don't leave. We're going to get to the good stuff, I promise.
We are, yes.
I would be remiss to not say that I could change an Omnipod in about 45 seconds. Like it really doesn't take any time at all. Jenny has a pump changing story that she won't tell on the podcast, but apparently you can do it almost anywhere. So
yes, yeah.
She's like, I shouldn't tell people that I've done that. I'm like, okay, well, it's all right. You keep that private then. Anyway. All right. So what the goal of this system, and this was, and I do say this all the time, this was the first like closed loop system out the door, right? Like this is the first one that got, FDA approved.
Yep.
And on the market. So points for being first because, just like in the military or firefighting or in anywhere else stuff, first guy through the door doesn't usually end up so good. So, right. So the point here is that, this was early on. How long has this thing been available now?
Oh gosh. I'd have to check online exactly when.
It's got to be a number of years now, right?
Correct. Yeah. It has been a number of years. I would have to look exactly, but I feel like, gosh, it's got to be at least 3, at least 2, okay. If not 3 years, because I'm trying to remember when I did my 670 training, and I feel like it was very soon after my 3-year-old was born.
Okay.
So that would be about at least 3 years, I would say.
Okay.
Let's call it.
So first things first, it's a system that's making decisions about insulin on and off, right? Does it increase basal?
It does.
It does. Okay.
So from that like kind of like hybrid closed loop system.
Yeah.
Yes, it does that. As your glucose changes, it will temporarily increase or do these incremental adjustments up in insulin delivery. As your blood sugar changes and drops, it also does an incremental adjustment down. It also will temporarily suspend based on, where glucose is going to get to. It will do a suspend for you.
Okay.
It does not do like an automatic bolus kind of thing. Its bolusing structure is truly around food.
Okay. And that's still on you to tell it how much you're eating and all that stuff.
It is.
Right,
In fact, that's the only setting in the 2 modes of use of the 670 pump, which you can use in manual mode, which is just like your normal conventional pump use. All the features, all the settings, everything you have set work as they normally would. You're the controller. In auto mode, when you flip that on, then the only setting that is used for true calculation or exact calculation from a math standpoint that the user can figure out is carbs. Their carb to insulin ratio stays true to what is set in the pump. So if you have set a 1:14 ratio, the pump is going to use that along with the glucose value to suggest a bolus for that food.
Okay. Can you adjust the bolus? Can you say, oh, I would like this to be no, you can't. Okay. So in a situation where, like say the glycemic load of a food is going to hit you heavier than the carb count, what do you do then?
So there are no longer temporary basals. There is no longer an extended bolus. And on Medtronic's pump, their extended bolus is referred to as either a square wave or a dual wave, right? None of those features are now available once you are in auto mode. So you're right. The hard thing is that for a meal such as, and we've talked about it so many times, but like pizza, right? I mean, a lot of people are not going to get the hefty management in the aftermath for fat that they've been used to getting when they're using maybe an extended bolus for fat or a temporary basal to offset the later impact of fat. That feature isn't there as an option with the auto mode. Now, as glucose does start to change, you will get those microscopic adjustments in insulin dosing up to accommodate for the change that is happening. But it's not going to be like your very robust temporary basal of 60+% above your normal in order to take care of it.
It's going to be very incremental and smaller.
Correct. And correction boluses, it's another place to kind of bring in. Correction boluses they're very difficult to navigate within auto mode.
Okay.
Because the system it's more conservative, right? Its target that it's aiming for is 120. And it doesn't really start to adjust or aggressively navigate blood sugars until you're higher.
What does higher mean?
Right? Like the 160, 180 range.
And then it starts to crank on the basal or a little
and then
more.
It starts to crank based on the trend. And, it is referring to the trend in glucose that's happening, right? But overall, you're not getting an aggressive enough nature to assist. So, many people are learning when to potentially shift out of auto mode, when to potentially shift back into manual mode or, back into auto mode. So there are some tricks and or tips to using the system to your advantage.
Right. I think we'll be talking about that. So I I'm trying to understand just one more thing. So
yeah,
when I put a bunch of insulin in for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it's going to know. Is there a way to tell it, hey, this is pizza? It's not really going to hit me for an hour. You can't tell it timelines of food or absorption rates or anything like that. Okay. So this thing throws in, I say I'm going to eat 2 slices of pizza. I tell it it's 60 carbs. It throws all the insulin in. Does it then work with the bolus? Meaning, does it take the basal away to let the bolus work, or does the basal still stay in play?
It kind of depends on what the shift in glucose is,
the situation for
what's
you.
happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it could take away the basal if it thinks you're going to get low, and then let the bolus try to work. But then that doesn't feel
right.
Yeah.
And
okay.
yeah, and it does it along with, as I said before, the only true setting that's sort of carried over from your normal setting mode is the insulin to carb ratio. And then it also utilizes the active insulin time that you have set as well.
Okay.
So that's a piece of, how long should this insulin really be working? If you've got it set for 2 hours, well, then the pump is going to think that 2 hours from now, you're clear of any active bolus insulin. So it may allow you to take some correction within the automatic mode.
Okay.
But yeah, it doesn't use your current basal rates. It doesn't use your current sensitivity or correction factor. Again, it targets a blood sugar of 120.
So you just said if the action time's short enough, then, say 2 hours, then 2 hours later, you'd be eligible to make a correction bolus then?
Potentially, depending. And it'll only suggest correction boluses if your blood sugar is above 150.
Oh, okay. So I can't decide I'm 130, I want this to stop. I'm going to give myself some insulin. I have to be over 150 for it to even allow that.
Yes.
But I could go out of auto mode and then do whatever I want. Then it's just an insulin pump.
Then it's just an insulin pump like you're normally using. Yes.
Okay. But I guess the problem with that is that it's been making decisions about insulin based on what it thinks is going to happen. And then I come in and make different changes. How do I get back into auto mode without a problem? I don't know about you, but here we are 5 weeks into our social isolation. I don't think I've been out of my house more than a few times, except to wander around in my yard. And it's starting to get a little weird. It's starting to be difficult to care about things. I don't know how I mean that exactly. Let me think it through for a second. I didn't comb my hair yesterday, and I didn't care. And I went outside, and my neighbors saw me, and my hair was sticking in 16 different directions. And I just thought, whatever. I'm worried, though, that attitude is going to bleed into other parts of my life. And I'm worried that it might for you as well. For instance, were you just about to find out more about ways to make yourself healthier right before all this happened, and now you just feel like you're on pause, just waiting for the world to pick back up again? Well, I know that's true for some things, but it's not for everything. For example, right now, with very little effort, you could get Omnipod to send you a no-obligation free demo of the Omnipod right to your house. It's amazing. myomnipod.com/juicebox. You go there, you fill out your information, and a box will arrive at your home with your Omnipod. Now, you'll probably it'll be on the front step, and you'll be shooting it with Lysol and stuff like that. But after you do that, inside, you're going to find an Omnipod, and it's all for you to wear, to try, to test, to shower in. You can find out how the Omnipod looks on you while you don't comb your hair, or while you're sitting in a chair, staring off into space. Once you understand how that's going to work, you'll be ready to wear your Omnipod as you launch yourself back into the world with your new insulin pump, ready to make these kinds of adjustments that you hear us talking about all the time on the podcast. Temp basal increases, decreases, extended boluses, not having to disconnect your pump for a shower, being able to set up basal programs, which sounds really difficult but isn't. But just think of it this way. If you're on MDI and you get low overnight, but not during the day, and you think, I don't know, if I take away my insulin, my basal insulin, so I don't get low overnight, I'll get high during the day. But on the Omnipod, you don't have to worry about that. You could set up one basal program for the daytime and one for the nighttime. One time you need more insulin and one time you need less. You can keep that pump on while you're showering, swimming, walking around in your backyard, trying to remember what it was like to go to the movies. And then, once everything's back to normal, all the other things that your life is. myomnipod.com/juicebox. Get a demo pod sent to you today. You're not doing anything else anyway. Please don't put your health on pause. Now, when you get done with that, here's the next step. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Find out today why I love the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor so very, very much. The information that comes back from the Dexcom is not just to keep you safe. It's to keep you healthy. It's to keep you ahead of the curve that is your blood sugar. You can stop the blood sugar curve a lot easier than you can flatten other curves by just pre-bolusing a little bit, or understanding where you need more or less insulin, or how some meals impact you differently than others. You can get all of that and so much more at dexcom.com/juicebox. Examples are from my daughter's life with type 1 diabetes. Your results may vary. Links available at juiceboxpodcast.com and right there in the player of your podcast app. There's show notes. Look around. You can just touch on it and boom, you'll be right there at the link you want. It's magical. How do I get back into auto mode without a problem?
Yeah, and that is the difference. Sometimes it is just a button push, right? It's a turn the auto mode back on. So it seems as though it would be an easy fix. But when you go back into auto mode, it's then looking at the sensor data for an accuracy. And then it's evaluating, and it may require some additional information. It may ask you to calibrate. It may ask you to add a glucose, which isn't really a calibration. All it's doing is requiring a glucose value to be added, which kind of goes into a lot of the alarms and things that people get annoyed with within the system, because it just needs to see that glucose value and reevaluate where things are at this point. So you may get, going back into auto mode, some of those alerts and alarms before it starts doing things. And then there are also limits, to how much in auto mode the basal insulin will be allowed to increase. And it's interesting because it does vary sort of person to person. It's about, from what we can kind of tell, it's about 2 to 2.5 times your average basal rate.
Okay.
Excuse me, is what it'll allow as far as an increase in the basal adjustment that it's giving.
Okay.
And again, remembering that any temporary basal increase isn't really like a bolus to correct. So if you're seeing a trend that's going up and you're waiting for the system to kind of kick in, that temporary adjustment is also going to take time to start affecting that blood sugar. So it's it doesn't really adjust quick enough.
And it's only a portion of how much you would put in if you were making a bolus in that situation.
Right.
So not only is it a fraction of what you need, but it's going in as basal and probably taking up to an hour for it to actually be an impact.
To potentially impactful. So exactly.
Then your 130 is going to make it to 200 by the time it's there, and it's not going to be enough by the time it's there to begin with.
Right.
Okay.
And then on the opposite end too, you know, if you're looking at lower blood sugars, and this is true even in conventional pumps, if you're low now, you need to treat the low.
Right.
You don't expect that a temporary basal adjustment, or even one that's being augmented by an automatic system like this, if you're low, you have to fix it. Yeah. You can't expect that a temporary adjustment down is going to offset where you are now.
My blood sugar's 50, it's 50. A basal off isn't going to turn a 50 into 100 in any kind of reasonable amount of time, right?
No.
If ever.
Right.
So when I correct that 50, do I tell it that I did that? Do I tell it carbs? Because I find that to be an interesting problem, because they're such quick acting carbs. you know that, within reason, if you're reasonably good at correcting a low, you're going to take in enough fast acting carbs to get your 50 back to 80 or 90 or 100, hopefully. You don't want any insulin for that, because it's that little bump. That little bump's not going to send you to the moon. So you don't want to all of a sudden tell it, I've just taken in 10 carbs, because will it then, when you get to 90, start baseling at the carbs? You know what I mean?
It's baseling not based on any of the carb information it's giving you. In fact, if you entered carbs, if it didn't think that you needed a bolus based on where you are, it wouldn't offer a bolus. But it's not intuitively looking at that carb stamp and saying, now I need to change the dosing because there are carbs in the picture. It's only looking at the change in glucose.
So if that fast acting carb did cause a rise, then it would start affecting it, but not based on the carbs. It would be based on the sensor data.
Based on the sensor data, and again, based on where does the glucose start to be adjusted by the auto mode system. It has to be a certain height in order for it, or a certain trajectory towards a high number, that it would start to offset things.
What is that number? Where does it start to correct,
I'm trying to remember whether it's I haven't used the system personally in a while, and I have to think, and I'd have to look that up actually, and see if I can find that, because I can't remember the exact number that it starts to correct at or above. I do know that, if for corrections, as we were kind of just chatting about too, some users might already be thinking, well, gosh, I just enter some extra carbs when I'm high, even though I'm not going to eat them. And so it generates a bolus for me.
Okay.
So they're doing, and a lot of people are calling that like ghost carbs that you aren't eating, but you're just putting them in because, hey, I know if I enter 20 grams of carb, I can get that 1 unit bolus that I really need because my blood sugar is higher than it want it to be, but the system isn't offering anything outside of this.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to enter it in. The problem is that it can offset data analysis then. Right? So when a practitioner or a caregiver or somebody is looking at data,
it's confusing.
It can get very confusing with where to make adjustments.
Right.
So, if you did use that strategy, the one thing that we would really recommend doing is making a note in whatever your logging system is. Tidepool is a nice place to make notes like that because they pop up right on that daily trend, to be able to say, hey, I see a 10-gram entry here with a bolus. Yeah, that was a ghost carb. So I've got some people who just enter ghost carbs as a tag note, but again, it's also kind of in practice, it's kind of discouraged, even though people do it very often.
Well, is it a problem inside of the system because you've now told it that carbs exist that don't exist? So what happens an hour from now if you've if you do want to eat, your example's better. If I do want to eat, it believes there's carbs in there, and now it's going to change the bolus somehow, either more or less, or
because it'll see insulin on board for a purpose.
Right.
So it will have effect on, auto mode for hours after putting in that corrective ghost carb entry to generate it. It is accumulating then. If you do that at 3:00 in the morning, you're not going to eat until 9:00 in the morning. That's not really going to have any major impact overall, other than just hopefully navigating you down safely.
But if you're trying to stop a rise an hour before dinner, then everything's going to get messed up.
Then everything gets messed up. Yes. Okay. And this all kind of goes back to the beginning of what we always educate is get your settings right also.
Right.
Before you go into auto mode.
Okay.
Yeah. Make sure things are good. And it's really, I think, in the hybrid closed system that the 670 is, this is even more important, mainly because before you switch on auto mode, the system is gathering insulin dosing data in the days before you switch on auto mode. So it essentially will update its algorithm of insulin use at midnight every night based on your amount of insulin you've used over about the past week.
Okay.
So we've found that it's best, and I don't remember exactly what Medtronic says. I think that they're saying 2 or 3 days. We've found that it's most advantageous for people to be in manual mode of normal insulin dosing with well-set settings for about a week before turning auto mode on.
Okay. You're not going to buy this thing, slap it on, and be like, fix me, right?
No, it's not. And that's where it is very different comparative to Tandem's Control IQ.
Okay.
Control IQ, you put your settings in, all of your settings work in Control IQ mode. You can slap it on out of the box, put in all your settings, turn Control IQ, and you're off and running.
It just starts working. Okay.
Not so with 670.
So 670G is actually trying to learn? Is that a fair statement or no?
In a very beginning sort of rudimentary way, yeah.
So it's just collecting data, like you used 50 units on Tuesday, 45 on Wednesday, but all of a sudden, somehow that's helping it make decisions.
Correct. Now, there are also some drawbacks to that, right?
I see a ton of them as you're talking, but go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And you probably do. I mean, you're intuitive about all of this because of the years of experience that you have in managing with Arden, but you can see where this leads to, especially from a female point, right? If you are in that time potentially before your cycle starts, where you have these high insulin needs and everything needs to be ramped up, then what happens when your cycle starts and all of your insulin needs plummet to sometimes for women 10% less than what their standard profile is running for a day or two of their first 2 days.
And this thing's made a decision based on a time when you've been resistant for a whole week.
Correct.
Right.
Or people who've been using steroids because they're sick, or people who've had like an unbelievable amount of stress for the past 3 days because their father passed away or whatever. Yeah. Well, that could lead to things being in auto mode more aggressive, really.
So there's a thing that is pretty common within, how people talk about diabetes that I completely discount. I don't pay attention to it and I don't believe in it 100% or even maybe 10%. But the idea that, 3 days makes a trend. I'm like, okay, it makes a trend. It doesn't mean it's going to keep happening. For all the reasons you just said, like, okay, I finally figured out I need my basal to be 0.5 an hour. And then I get that set up and something changes. There's too many variables to say that any one trend is an indicator of the month. Do you know what I mean? Like that doesn't make any sense, male or female. I don't buy into that at all. What if 1 week I decide, I don't know, I'm going to eat more vegetables than red meat or than, you know what I mean? And then the next week it's different. I don't know.
Right.
Like there's just there's too many things. I work a little harder at work this week than I did last week. I get a little more sleep, a little less sleep. If you're looking for that, if you're trying to find a repeatable pattern in that, I don't imagine that exists. And if it does, it's well beyond what an insulin pump or me can figure out, Right. So I'm just more...
Well, even for the people who have done the testing and let's say they'd have for the most part figured out, like, I always need about this much more for this time period or this much less or whatever. Well, for the woman who's sort of figured out her monthly like cycle changes and how much more she needs and what basal profile to set on and whatever. Well, what if you start training for a marathon? Mm-hmm. Or you've decided to now, go swimming for an hour every morning.
Yeah.
That is going to create a difference in need into this next month. And so it probably will look like, well, gosh, everything's different again. Well, you brought a variable into the picture that wasn't there when you were doing the testing to begin with.
Right. You can't turn to your pump and say, hey, pump, listen, it's just you and me this week. I got a report due at work. It's a lot of pressure here. My bonus is riding on this. I'm probably going to be a little yacked up, just so you know. 20 more %. I think I'm going to have some stress, high blood sugars. That doesn't exist. So you need to be able to be flexible for those things. I don't know. I've just never been a fan of the idea that, 3 days is a rule. It's a rule for those 3 days. It's not, and so if that's the case, what people always end up doing is spending 3 days trying to figure out what's going on. They stare at high blood sugars or stare at low blood sugars, trying to find out if it's going to become a thing that they can count on. I'm always just like, I think you should deal with diabetes in the moment, and then whatever happens is now gone. And don't get me wrong. If Arden's needed less insulin on Saturday and it looks like that's how it's going to be on Sunday, I remember that. That's part of being flexible, right?
Yeah.
But if I wake up on Sunday and all of a sudden she needs more insulin, I don't say to myself, well, that's not true because yesterday she didn't need a lot. So we're just going to watch her blood sugar be 300 all day today. Like, that's not it. Like, I think diabetes is a in the moment situation, but okay. So let me ask you this. I say this all the time, and maybe it's not true for this one, and maybe it is. I'm going to get your opinion. I think that for most people living with type 1 diabetes, these systems, the 670G that's available now, and obviously has been out for a couple of years, the Tandem system and the forthcoming Horizon from Omnipod, which we should be seeing pretty soon. As long as the coronavirus doesn't keep throwing things off.
Affect anything,
yeah. So those things exist. And for most people living with type 1 diabetes, what are it up to, like 1.8 million people now and that have it. For most people, slapping these systems on is probably a huge improvement for them. Don't you think?
Yes. In fact, we've had quite a number I wouldn't say quite a number, but a good enough number of people that we work with who the 670 has smoothed things out considerably. Okay. It has. They were up, down, roller coasting consistently, day to day, high to low, no assistive management to help with that variance in their blood sugar. And overall, while they're still probably averaging a blood sugar of 140 to 150, the system has smoothed out the variance and it's kept them more stable. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no.
And for most people that's the case, they're happy with it getting them to a target of 140. It targets 120, but for the most part, if you talk to most people, they're really achieving an average somewhere between 130 to probably 160, give or take. But again, stability there, that's a huge piece.
Right. So if you've gained stability and you're an average of 160 instead of 220, it's an incredible improvement for you in the moment and probably for your entire life as well.
And a lot of people still, even in auto mode, they're still reaping the benefit of these hybrid kinds of systems, especially in the overnight. Yeah. Most people without food in the picture, a system like this is a huge advantage for the overnight.
Get some sleep and you don't get low as much and you don't get those crazy highs overnight as much. What about, I feel like we're remiss if we don't mention the Guardian sensor. So obviously my daughter uses a Dexcom G6. They're sponsors of the show. You use a Dexcom. The scuttlebutt for me, from what I see on the street from the kids, is that people don't think the Guardian's as accurate as the Dexcom. Is that a fair statement from what you've seen, or how do you even?
I think that's a very fair statement. Okay. It is. I mean, even from my personal sensor use of 2 of their sensors, I tried the Enlite years ago. When I was training, on their pump to begin with. And then when I trialed the 670 with their Guardian, I would say that it was an improvement from what I had with the Enlite. Okay. It was definite improvement, but it was still not for me anywhere near the accuracy or the consistency in accuracy that I get with my Dexcom. Okay. In fact, when I was using the 670, I wore my Dexcom at the same time.
Oh, okay. So you could
to compare. I mean, when you're wearing like several things, who cares about another site, right? Like, I'm just going to be the ultimate like robot person, right?
Jenny looked like a wind chime, right?
Right, exactly. So, and I follow, there are certain, things to definitely make sure that you're getting the sensor to work as well as possible to begin with, from the Guardian standpoint, because it is, I would say the best word for it, it's finicky comparative to Dexcom.
Okay.
And I personally tried all those tips, tricks, things that could possibly be done. And it never really worked well for me. And I think that that's the biggest hang up then that I had with it in auto mode, is that it drove me crazy with all of the requests for additional glucose entries and calibrations. It wasn't accurate. And thus, in any of these hybrid systems, if you have a sensor that is not accurate, the adjustments in something like auto mode or in control IQ closed mode, you're not going to get accurate adjustment,
right?
Because your sensor is not accurate to begin with.
When you say it asks for calibration, so it knows well enough that it's not okay, but it doesn't know where okay is. Is that?
So for the most part, our go-to recommendations for getting your sensor to work as well as possible, we recommend calibrating that sensor, and it does require calibration. Mm-hmm. Unlike G6 for Dexcom, the Guardian does require calibrations, but we recommend calibrating about 3 to 4 times a day at more regular times of day. But the biggest thing is really to ideally do it when your glucose is more stable.
Okay.
In order to avoid what we know in all of the sensing systems, there is lag time based on if something is trending down or trending up right now, there's lag that's happening. Your finger stick is often either lower or it could be higher based on what's happening trend wise.
Sure.
So the goal is to try to calibrate when you've got a horizontal kind of angled trend happening. Also, the accuracy of the glucometer that you're using to calibrate with
is a big deal too. Yeah.
That's a huge deal. I mean, if you're using some off the market, not off the market, but like random generic brand, don't to calibrate.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's the easiest. Just don't. I know that some people, it's based on what their insurance is able to cover. Right? Or what they can afford. I get that, but then also understand that your calibration of these systems may actually mess up the natural sensing of what it sees as being there.
Yeah, you're wearing a state-of-the-art glucose sensing system, and calibrating it with something you got out of a bubblegum machine, it's not going to go well, because then you just confuse the sensor by telling it, let's say the sensor thinks you're 110, you're really 120, and your meter is like, no, we're 80. And you put that information in, that the sensor is going to go, and it's not going to know what to do, and it's going to confuse it, and you have to be careful.
The thing with Medtronics, it does come with a monitor that connects with the pump, which is nice. It's the best one that's on the market. It's the Contour Next.
Yeah.
If you get it with the pump, use it, because that is the best rated as far as accuracy on the market. And that goes for anybody that's out there.
If you want to know why the Contour Next One is sponsoring the show now, it's because Arden's experience with the Contour Next One meter has been head and shoulders better than any other meter she's ever used. As far as consistency, ease of use, portability, and how closely it agrees with the G6 is fascinating. I don't know if that speaks well for the G6 or for the meter or for both, maybe, honestly, but I've never seen so much consistency between technology before. And,
according to, one of the last conferences I went to when I was able to fly and actually be within 6 feet of somebody else, I stopped at the Roche, where AccuCheck, their guide or Guide Me is also one of the highest rated accuracy on the market. So if you can't, for some reason, insurance coverage wise, use the Contour, that AccuCheck guide or Guide Me is also very good. Yeah. So, but that goes along with sensor, any sensor that you're calibrating, but definitely one that could have some finicky component to it. For the Guardian, try to make sure that your glucometer is a good one. And then of course, any sensor, it's the insertion of it. Are you putting it in the right way? Are you cleaning your site? Are you making sure that your the transmitter for the Guardian needs to be charged? And so unlike Dexcom, which you just slap it on and it continues to work every time you put it with a new sensor until it's dead at 90 days, the transmitter for the Guardian has to be charged.
Well, that just confused me. I can't charge it while it's on my body, right?
Oh, no.
Then so I have to pop it out and charge it? How often do I have to do that?
Oh, the charging, that's another one that I'd have to look back and see exactly. It doesn't take long to charge it.
Okay.
But I know that it's at least every 5 to 7 days. But don't directly quote me on that. But it requires charging. And there's like a little, that comes with the system. There's a little charging like port that you pop it into and it charges and then it's ready. But if your transmitter isn't well charged or it's kind of at the end, don't put on a brand new sensor and then you're going to have to pop it out and it just weirds up the system.
Well, we're selling the hell out of this thing, aren't we? Geez. All right. So being serious, like that seems like more work. I have to take, every number of days.
But if you do want a positive,
go ahead.
It lasts longer than your transmitters.
Okay.
That's a huge positive, right?
You don't have to replace the actual device as frequently. You
don't have to, right? The transmitter is there. You've got it until it's no longer working for you. And that's a nice thing.
It's a great point. I only ever have our experiences. I've never experienced a gap where we didn't have Dexcom supplies. But that very well may be because I'm on top of ordering them or because my insurance doesn't argue about it. I don't know why. There's probably a number of different reasons. Mm-hmm. But okay, so there's a good and bad. So you have to recharge it, but it lasts longer.
It lasts longer. Right. It does require some taping.
Oh, it tries to fall off, does it?
Well, I think all the sensors on the market, depending on body type and what the moisture level and, everything in your skin is, everybody's a little bit different. I mean, I occasionally in the summertime need to tape down or put a thing around my Dexcom as well. Mm-hmm. But the Medtronic sensor specifically has to be taped down. It's not I can choose to do it. It's kind of a funny, I wish we had like visual, but once the transmitter is popped into this little sensor piece,
right,
the transmitter
bounces.
It's like if you imagine a beaver with its tail. The tail is the transmitter. Jenny
is making a hand motion that's making me feel like, has anyone ever been driving in like snow and the back of your car gets like a little light and starts bouncing around and so she's basically saying that the back
it's
of
like a beaver tail.
Yeah, the back of the transmitter is bouncing.
Yes, if you don't tape it. And obviously you don't want it bouncing because it could easily come disconnected.
And it's pulling at the adhesive and it's pulling at the sensor wire and all the other stuff too.
And then that decreases accuracy. So Medtronic supplies you with all of the adhesive tape that you do need to tape it down and keep it in place. They give you directions to tape it the right way and pop it in and everything. So again, it's not extra stuff that you have to remember. It comes with your supplies, but it's an extra piece of use that isn't there for the other sensors.
I'm holding in my laughter because I'm trying not to be a hater on this situation here, but my brain's going, maybe don't design it to do that. And then, or when you design it, you go, hey, this thing's bouncing around. Like, who's the person that was like, we'll give them tape? Not maybe we should redesign it.
Right. Well, the question in my mind honestly always comes, and this is not specific to Medtronic, but it's any product that comes out on the market. People with diabetes get it, and they're like, why did they do this?
Yeah.
Why is it designed like this? Like, did they not ask people with diabetes how their life would work if we did this weird part to it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm always like, well, I guess somebody thought it was a good idea.
Well, some engineer maybe who doesn't have to wear it just thought about the usability of it and it works. Look, it works. And at this shape, we can make it rechargeable and, all that. Listen, I'm imagining it wasn't by mistake. I don't think they were just like, I don't care, but there sounds like there were trade-offs made. And, as we're having this conversation too, I don't know what the date is for G7, but G7 is going to become disposable, right? Like you're not going to.
That's what I've heard as well.
Yeah, you're not going to have that transmitter with the battery. You're going to put it on, and when it's over, the whole thing's going to go in the garbage, and you're going to start over again. And it's going to have enough battery life in it for the life of the sensor bed, and that's it. So yeah, I mean, things are moving forward quickly. I think from a personal perspective, as I watch Medtronic and their pumps, it feels to me like they're making a 5-pound bag of cereal. Do you know what I mean? Like it's mass market, like
the ones that cost like $2 on the very bottom bin, and you're like, oh, that's the best deal.
But you get so much of it, right? Like I feel like they've put themselves in a position where they're giving pumps to more people than the other two companies, right? And so what they're saying is quantity over quality. Like that's how it feels to me. Like we're going to serve these pumps to as many people as we can, and it'll work for most of them and it won't work for some of them. And that's just the price of doing business. I don't know. I could be wrong. It's just how it feels from the outside because of all the things. Like, I mean, listen, Jenny's just been sharing her experience wearing the device, and she's not, and she hears people talk about it as well when she's doing her job. But there's a lot here that seems fixable, except it doesn't change ever. It's just sort of like they won't change this thing till they change the system. They're not going to come back and make an adjustment to it or anything. They're making them, they're pumping them out, no pun intended, and this is what they are until they're done. We're just going to give people tape and then we'll fix it next time, I guess.
Right. And we do, and there are, I mean, speaking to that specifically, from what we know clinically and the bit that's been shared, they are already on it as a company. There are products that should be coming out in the future. When, I don't have any idea. Mm-hmm. We're not privy to that information, but there will be a new sensor that will be more accurate, more user-friendly. From what I remember and understand, it will not have that beaver tail transmitter kind of piece to it. Yeah. It will be much simplified, and their next iteration of this hybrid closed loop system that they have will be more fine-tuned with a lot of these pieces that they're kind of a pain to have to deal with, yeah. Right? So they are working on it, as are all the companies out there, right? 100%. They're continuing to build and, make changes and listen.
And I meant what I said when we started out, that I think it's not a great position to be in, to be first. You know what I mean? Because you probably had to do a lot of things to get through the FDA, and now that's been softened for Omnipod and Tandem now. That right. That path's been cleared out a little bit for them. So there's a lot of good, somebody going first is, and to be honest, if it was going to be anybody, it makes sense that it was Medtronic, honestly, because they're
the oldest on the market. Yeah, honestly, right. Of all of the pump systems, they are the oldest that is still around. Yeah. I mean, all the rest are pretty much gone.
Right. Yeah.
There are lots of people who love their combo pumps and their Animus and things. So
they're all gone.
They're all gone.
Was it Cosmo? What was that one that people
Cosmo.
loved? The Cosmo pump, right?
Yeah. In fact, another Scott Johnson, who has his own little diabetes blog, and he works with the My Sugar group now. He was he babied his Cosmo and
kept it going as long as he could.
He hoarded supplies in order to keep it going as long as he could. He'd probably, I don't know what he's using anymore, but he'd probably go back to it if he could, because he really loved his nice. Cosmo pump.
Scott's a nice person. I've met him a couple of times.
He's awesome.
So what's the overview here of this? If you have the system and it's not working the way you want it to, you're going to have to go out of auto mode sometimes to address some meals, but not all, or you're going to have to understand that your blood sugars are going to be higher than maybe you want and just let it be.
We have some kind of standards of when to go out of auto mode. Honestly, the initial question you asked a while ago about, well, what if I'm eating this really slow digesting or really high fat meal, or, my normal peak is going to be way out here and whatever. And you were used to using a square wave or a dual wave bolus before, you know what? It might be best to temporarily switch back to manual mode, use what you knew worked from the get-go.
Right. And
then when it's done, switch back to your auto mode.
Okay.
I mean, that's really one of the settings of switching out of auto mode. Another one might be, honestly, sick days, high stress, those kinds of things, or even, like I said, high fat meals, et cetera, where you really, let's say you always know that when you've got this really nasty, like cold, that you use 25% more insulin.
Change
You've got
your
a temporary, you've even maybe got a profile set for sick days, right? You know what? Don't hesitate to switch out and go back and use that because you knew it worked.
Does that system allow for me to could I set up multiple like profiles? No. So I can't have a pizza profile and a regular profile. But see, that would fix it. If I suddenly made the sensitivity and the insulin on board times differently and changed like my carb ratios.
Because remember why? It's gathering data over the past several days of insulin sensitivity.
And I can't keep changing it around because it won't matter.
Correct.
All right. Okay.
Yes. But that's a great question. Again, days, I even think of days like my brother-in-law works for Disney. And so we've gone down there more times than I can count, and we've enjoyed the parks and whatnot. And I know that a full day of getting up, this was pre-kids.
Yeah.
My husband and I were just enjoying the parks as adults, like running around like crazy kids trying to get to everything, right? I had to use not only a temporary basal all day long, but also overnight to avoid running too low.
Right.
Well, you know what? Auto mode would not benefit me in that scenario because I would just be running too low. It would be consistently trying to probably suspend me, not just temporarily decrease things. And that is also a limiting factor to the system that is different than the coming hybrid systems that are going to be on the market or are already. Yeah. There's only a certain time frame that it will high temp your basal for, or low temp or suspend for before the system kicks you out of manual mode and say, hey, this is all on you now. Okay. And it will alert you. It's not like it's all of a sudden gone and you're waking up at 3:00 in the morning. Great. I would have loved to know that you kicked me out. There's an alert that tells you are out of auto mode. You are back in manual mode. And it's because either you've reached the max amount of insulin delivery in a time period that's defined, or you've been suspended or decreased basal for a certain amount of time as well.
Interesting.
So in a day like I was describing, best to switch out of auto mode, go to your temp basal that worked. Mine was always setting a temp basal decrease of 15% for the whole day that we were there and into the overnight. That worked beautifully.
It's a great advice. And it also feels like it's a little sad because you're telling me that this pump that I'm thinking, oh, it's going to stop me from getting high. It's going to stop me from getting too low. It's going to be great. It's going to take my mind off of blood sugars, blah, blah, unless I go to Disney and run around all day and then it's back on me. Or I have pizza. Or
And remember, if you are going to Disney today and the last 4 days you were in some type of horrible business meetings that had you all jacked up in insulin need,
it's going to crush you with insulin.
It's going to think that your sensitivity is, exactly. You can't whisper and be like, hey 670G, I'm on vacation now.
I got a fast pass today, so keep up.
Right. Okay? Right. So keep up.
No, it's going to think, no, for the last 3 days, you've needed more insulin.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay. So you go from I've needed more situation to I need less situation, and it can't adjust.
It can't adjust fast enough is kind of the issue, right? Gotcha. And then I guess one of the last ones truly, which we've all experienced on every single pump, is an infusion site problem or a site failure or something, and if you're in that high blood sugar and it's a site problem and you go ahead and you change it, it really is best to switch back to manual mode. Change out your set, your tubing, maybe even your insulin. Give a bolus. We usually recommend via injection instead of through the new pump site. And then once your blood sugar is back in range, switch back to auto mode.
Right. Okay. At pump changes, I do something very similar at pump changes. Like I don't rely on the new site right away. Like I try to. And I also do not stare at bad sites. Like when sites don't. When how I say it, when an insulin pump site stops doing what I expect it to do, I do not stare at it for 10 hours wondering if it's going to get better again.
Right.
2 boluses, it doesn't do what I want.
That's it.
It's goodbye time. Yeah.
Right.
So,
right.
And it doesn't it's not like, Doesn't happen constantly. I'm just saying when it happens. I don't look at a pump and think, oh, I have 3 more hours left on this one. I can't wait. That's a rookie move, right? Like that idea of like, oh, there's 3 more hours here. I don't want to waste those 3 hours. There's 5 more units here. I don't want to waste those 5 units. I mean, money aside, I understand insulin's expensive. You're going to have diabetes for evs. You know what I mean? So like just trying to cheat 2 hours here and 3 hours here and 4 hours here, you might think, oh, I'm saving myself an insulin pump set or something like that every month. What you're doing is you're costing yourself 3 and then 2 and then 4 and then 6. And before you know it, 20 and 25 hours and 30 hours a month of high blood sugars by trying to sneak an extra 2 hours out of your pump.
Right.
I think you have to, if you can afford to, you have to think about it the other way, or supplement with injections if that's not working.
Correct. Right. Or something like, a Freza or something that works very rapidly and you know that it's going to work and it's going to get things down, or, whatever it is.
Don't look at a 180 going, oh, it's only for 8 more hours until the pump's done. Like, come on, don't do that.
Just don't do it to yourself. Exactly.
Your health is health is first. Health's the goal.
Well, and I think you're talking too, you're kind of like hiding from a situation that you can visibly see it's there, and you're like, we're just going to like step away.
Maybe it's going to fix itself.
Maybe it's going to fix it. Yeah. It's kind of like even, going along with like the auto mode, we really try to recommend not hiding things from auto mode too. Mm-hmm. Right. And one big one that is often forgotten, especially if you've gotten into this routine before having auto mode. And if you were an Omnipod user, switching to this system, you wouldn't even really think about because you've never disconnected. But when you disconnect from the pump in auto mode, suspend your pump. Okay. So the system knows that you are not receiving insulin.
Okay.
Because if it thinks you're receiving auto mode based adjustments of insulin,
it's counting
when you're really not getting them pumped into your body, it will then continue once you do plug back in. It'll continue to think that there's insulin there that wasn't.
Okay. So you have to tell it, if you disconnect the bathe or something like that,
you suspend your pump.
You suspend the pump so that it realizes nothing's happening.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that's an easy thing to forget to do. But do people forget?
I would say it's an easy thing to forget to do. Some people, especially in conventional mode, coming from conventional mode into using an automated mode like this system has, because I'd say probably 50% at least of people who disconnect from their pump because their system isn't connecting with a CGM to do anything with that insulin.
Yeah.
They're just disconnecting, letting it pump. They reconnect when they're done with their shower or done with their swim or whatever.
Don't think
maybe the really meticulous people are remembering to suspend their pump and then remembering to resume their pump once you reconnect.
I used to be surprised by the number of people who would tell me I took my pump off to get a shower and 3 hours later remembered I didn't have my pump
forgot.
On. Yeah. And I guess like I said, I used to be surprised because Arden uses a pump you don't disconnect from. I never considered it. But, after you think about it for a while, it's reasonable. You could be rushing around or you're doing whatever. I don't know. To me, it's a selling. Yeah. No, I hear you. Okay. Well, all right. I don't know do you think we've done anything valuable here? Like if a 670G person heard this, would they be like, I've heard something that might help me?
I think if you're a person currently using it, there are some tips, if you didn't know about them already, to maybe put into action to make it work a bit better for you, especially if you're somebody who is using auto mode pretty much 90, 95, maybe 100% of the time, and you feel like there is something to tweak, but you're not quite sure where to start. Maybe some of these tips. While we spoke about some of the drawbacks, I think the tips that are in here for people who are using it could be an advantage if they're already not trying them.
Okay.
I think another big one that oftentimes, again, with these hybrid types of systems is often a forgotten piece of teaching someone when they start on it is how to treat lows.
So you're not over treating your lows.
Correct. The age-old 15 grams every 15 minutes kind of thing. A lot of people are still following that. And on a conventional pump, especially if your settings aren't really dialed in very well, maybe it does work quite well for you. Maybe you even need to use 20 grams or 25 grams because you're really not sure how much insulin is there. And that always seems to be, it brings me up and I don't get low again. So I keep using this. Well, you can guarantee that on any of these hybrid systems that are augmenting the insulin delivery,
right,
you have to remember that in auto mode, if your blood sugar is decreasing, the system has already seen that. And if it's decreasing and you're going to get below a certain value or to a certain value, depending on the rate of trend, the system is either temporarily decreasing or it may already be suspending.
So it's already created a void of basal insulin, and then
Correct.
you put the food in, and once you stop the drop, there's nothing else there to help with the food.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Because that basal deficit, remember how long into the future
right.
that can make a change.
Okay.
So think about under-treating your lows.
Right. No.
That's the easiest way to say it.
Yeah. No, I think they're the little pieces that get lost, especially in a low situation, because there's a panic. I got a really lovely note from a person today, just this morning, who said how much the podcast has helped them just with that idea. You know, they used to get low and then eat a bunch of food and then just let whatever is going to be after that, instead of recognizing some of this food was for the low and some of it was because I'm ravenously hungry because I'm low and I'm scared and all these reasons that this food needs insulin. You know, some of this food needs insulin.
Right.
And the person said that just that idea from the podcast has really changed their days. You know what I mean? Like they're not spiking and dropping and spiking and dropping all the time. And that's the stuff nobody talks about. And it's tough. And not to put that on a pump company either.
No, they're not at all.
I don't know if people understand, like the pump companies through FDA regulations can't tell you how to manage your diabetes. They can tell you what the pump does and how to technically make the settings, like how to use it. They can't tell you when to use it. They're not allowed. You know what I mean? And that's supposed to be for your doctor, but then your doctor's busy telling you, you know, just keep eating 15 carbs and 15 carbs and 15 carbs. And then, you know, see what happens afterwards.
And along with that, you know, we bring into the picture technology, right? Our technology today using CGMs, you have to remember that CGMs lag, especially in times of lower blood sugars or in times of rapidly changing blood sugar values. Right. Yeah. So if you've treated your low, especially on an automated system like this, if you've treated it, you've got to wait. Yeah. Unless you're willing to do a finger stick and a finger stick to see that things have now, they've stabilized. I'm rising. My blood sugar's coming up, but look at that. My sensor's still reading at 52, but my finger stick is 83. Stop eating your 15 grams every 15 minutes.
Yeah, you have to stop caring about this. It's an interesting situation. You've corrected the low, and now you're going to wait for your body to respond. Your body begins to respond with a blood sugar that's rising. The sensor doesn't figure it out quickly enough. So you're still looking at the 52 going, I probably need more food. If you finger stick, you might be 65.
Right.
If you wait 10 minutes, you might be 74, and the CGM might believe you're 74 too. But it's that panic time right in there.
Yes.
And I'm a fan of testing. I like testing in that spot.
I do too.
Cautious, you know.
I do too. In fact, when in a conventional pump sense, I usually enter the carbs into my PDM because when I do that for a low blood sugar, if I enter too many grams of carb, the PDM will tell me I need to bolus.
Right. Yeah.
And if I have a certain amount of carbs and it's recommending a 0.0 bolus, I know that it's at least offsetting enough to bring me up. And potentially, if I've got insulin on board, it'll allow me to actually then take in enough carb to compensate for insulin on board and the low blood sugar without recommending a bolus.
Yeah.
If you enter it and you're like, I'm going to eat 49 grams of carb to treat this low, and your pump is like, okay, well, you need 2.2 units of insulin. I guarantee you probably need that 2.2 units of insulin, even though your blood sugar is sitting too low.
I will tell a story sometimes when I'm speaking publicly about the time it struck me, like when I finally figured it out. And Arden had a bad low. It came out of nowhere in the middle of the night. And, you know, everything you described, like she's falling so fast that the CGM, this is years ago, she was falling so fast the CGM didn't pick it up right away. It was also, I think, 2 generations of Dexcom ago. It was probably the G4.
Right.
And so she's falling fast, and I catch it. I test. She's really low. She's like 36. She takes in 65 carbs, right? And the 36, I finger stick, it holds. I wait 5 minutes, the longest 5 minutes of your life. You stick again. She's still 36. You go, okay, she's not falling. You know, you're like, all right. You wait again, you wait again, you wait again. Finger stick, 42, going up. All right. The CGM still just yelling low, low, low. Yeah, because it's just
lagging.
It's a little behind now, right? So I'm like, okay, 36 went to 36, went to 42. I'll wait. And I wait, and then I saw 54. And it was that time. It was this one time that I was like, God damn, you know what I'm going to do? I was like, I'm going to bolus. I was like, so she had like 65 carbs. And I think I bolused
because in your brain, you were like, 65 carbs was a lot of carbs.
Right. But the leap, first of all, you have that adrenaline. You just saw 36 blood sugar. The CGM's yelling low at you. All this is happening, but she's clearly coming up. I didn't bolus for all 65 carbs, but if I remember correctly, I think I did 40 of them. And I stopped her blood sugar at like 170 because trust me, 20 minutes later, her blood sugar started shooting up, right?
Yeah.
And even that gives you this anxiety because the CGM's catching up. You know, it's telling you low now, she's 54. Now all of a sudden she's probably 65. Now all of a sudden it goes, 40. And then it shows you arrows straight up and the arrows panic you. You're like, bah! You know what I mean? But because I was testing, I knew what was happening. I was like, all right, I'll forget this for a second. I'm going to stop paying attention to the glucose monitor for a second. And I'm going to go back to knowing what I know is going to happen. She's got food. She's clearly not low anymore. She's moving up. This is no different than a bad pre-bolus at a meal. Like it's almost like I pre-bolus too long. Like, right. That's all that's happening now. So like, what do I do next? And what I did next was insulin. And I'll tell you, if you've ever seen me speak live, like sometimes like I go out into my, my hallway afterwards. I leave Arden's room and I'm like, I got my arms up over my head. I'm like, oh, I killed this. I was like, oh my God, I did such a good job on this. And then I go to bed and that was it. But yeah, you can't, if you overtreat lows, especially in these auto systems, this one specifically, you're just going to bounce forever. Like then you're not letting the system do what it's there to do for you either.
Right.
You know? All right. Right. Well, I truly believe that, Medtronic's next system will be an improvement over this one. I agree. I 100% want to give them credit for doing it first because I think it's, I don't think they had a chance for an outcome any different than the one they got, being first and probably, I'm guessing, dealing with the restrictions from the FDA that they put on the first, hybrid system. So
absolutely, yeah. I'm quite sure that the restrictions and the parameters they had to stay within were outrageous to actually get a system on the market that could actually. I mean, the first step really was allowing CGM to replace finger stick.
Yeah.
It was.
100%.
And once that was approved, then they were like, okay, now that that's approved, now we can actually have a system that doses insulin based on CGM values. Yeah. I mean, that was the huge first step. So, I mean, they put a lot into place. I would not
we all need to appreciate
take away from that.
We all need to appreciate the speed in which things are moving through the FDA now that they did not used to. And I was mentioning this to somebody personally last night. If you go back a couple of years, and the CEO, Shacey from Omnipod is on the podcast, I'm asking her about like, hey, am I ever going to be able to control my daughter's pump from a phone? And her answer a couple of years ago was like, I mean, we would love that, but I don't know how we're getting that through the FDA. And now the Horizon's going to come out and it's going to be controlled through your phone. And it's a couple of years later. And so for new people who are used to like Dexcom being like, here's the G4, here's the G5, here's the G6, the G7's coming. That's not how diabetes has worked historically, getting new technology to market. So things are moving so much more quickly than it used to. And it's really amazing, And it's making a big difference for people. I mean, really, even considering just the 670 system and some of the pivotal trials and the things that Medtronic came out with even years ago. I mean, they really proved that people who used it with a lot of the strategies of applied management to using it, I mean, they can achieve an A1C
kind of shortly under a 7%, sort of in like the 6.8, 6.9% range. I mean, a good percentage of time in range. I mean, if you were falling short of that, 40%, 50%, if you're using the system well and auto mode most often, you can get 70, 75% in range, with that range being like, that 70 to sort of 180-ish kind of place.
It's such a big deal,
but
for a lot of people.
For that's huge for many people. So
you have to remember where you're coming from when you listen. Like when you say an A1C like in the low 7s, my mind is like, oh, that's 1.5 points higher than I want it to be. Right. But that's for me. A person who's got an A1C who's 9 is like, wow, just saved my life.
I'll take it.
Yeah. No, 100%. No, I believe it. I really do. Like, I like to tease Medtronic. Mostly I like to tease them in case they're listening, because I am not a fan of what you do in Washington around insurance and the way you throw your weight around and limit other pumps. So for that, and I'll bleep this later, I think you're a bunch of assholes. But, for the rest of it, we're just here talking about the pump.
Yeah.
That's all. Let Scott Johnson have his goddamn Cosmo pump. It wouldn't have been that bad, damn it.
It wouldn't, no.
He wasn't taking that much money out of your pocket, Medtronic. He could have let it be, all right?
Right. Kicking all these other products off the market.
Yeah, I hear it. Okay. Huge thanks to my sponsors, Dexcom and Omnipod. We never mention it, but the opinions expressed on this podcast are not those of the advertisers. Probably should say that once in a while. To take that thought a step further, I'm an idiot. I don't really know anything. So, grain of salt and all. And I'm sure there's a ton of wonderful people at Medtronic. To find out more about the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, go to dexcom.com/juicebox. Please use my link. Click on it. You can do it right there in your podcast player right now. And to get a free no obligation demo of the Omnipod sent directly to you, myomnipod.com/juicebox. Don't forget, Thursday, the 23rd of April, 2020 at 3 p.m. on the Bold with Insulin Facebook page, a live Scott and Jenny. Jenny and I are going to answer your questions right there on the Facebook machine. And later you'll hear it on the podcast. It's actually at Bold with Insulin on Facebook. So I don't know how you do that. Facebook.com. There's some slashes in there, but you'll find it. What else? I don't know. I hope you guys are being safe and finding things to pass your time and all that stuff. I am recording this right now in a pair of shorts, and it's too cold to be in shorts, but doesn't matter because I'm not going anywhere. So at least I'm wearing the shorts.